On this episode of Black Girl Gone, I tell the story of Sarah Washington, a 25-year-old woman who was murdered in Kankakee, Illinois on June 26, 2014. On that day, Sarah's mom went to her apartment to pick her up for work. But when she arrived, her daughter did not answer the phone, and so she went to her front door and found it unlocked. Sarah's mom entered her apartment and in her bedroom found Sarah lying on the floor, dead. Sarah had been shot twice. When police arrived, they found very little evidence and no clear motive. But when a seemingly unrelated murder takes place days later, detectives are able to narrow in on a suspect. But the motive, even 10 years later, remains unclear. This is Sarah's story. In 2014, Sarah Washington was a small-town girl with big dreams and a bright future ahead of her. But her story took a tragic turn, and a decade after her brutal murder, many questions still remain unanswered about why it happened. Sarah Washington was born on June 10, 1981 in Rushville, Illinois, the only daughter of D'Angelo and Kathy Washington, who had 4 sons. Raised in Macomb, Illinois, she grew up surrounded by the love of a large, close-knit family. Sarah graduated from Central High School in Clifton, Illinois, before attending Kankakee Community College, where she earned her Certified Nursing Assistant certification. Her family remembers her as a deeply spiritual person, devoted to her faith, who regularly attended church and found comfort in her beliefs. Beyond her spirituality, Sarah was known for her many passions. She loved spending her free time reading and listening to music and indulging in her love for musicals and plays, attending any performance she could. Like many young women, Sarah had a keen interest in fashion and shopping, but for her, it went beyond a casual hobby. Her love for style evolved into a genuine desire to pursue a career in modeling, a dream she nurtured alongside her other interests, and that dream became a reality. Sarah began modeling with Polk Entertainment Modeling Troupe and eventually secured a professional contract with Factor Modeling Agency based in Chicago. Despite her rising success in the modeling world, Sarah remained committed to her day job as a CNA, working at Riverside Medical Center, where she was beloved by both patients and staff. By 2014, Sarah was living a fulfilling life in the small town of Kankakee, balancing her work at the hospital with her blossoming modeling career. She also had a boyfriend named Greg, whom she had met through her best friend. And while no one's life is truly perfect, Sarah seemed to have found a balance, and those who knew her believed she was well on her way to a successful future. But in June 2014, just a few weeks after her 25th birthday, Sarah's life was brutally taken. On June 26, 2014, Kathy, Sarah's mother, said that they spent that morning running errands. She picked her daughter up from her apartment and then dropped her back off sometime around 11:50 a.m. The plan was for Kathy to come back later that afternoon to pick Sarah up so that she could take her to work. It's not clear, but it seems like her mom taking her to work was something that was a routine occurrence, and so nothing about that day seemed out of the ordinary. But when Kathy dropped her daughter off at the apartment, she had no idea what would await her when she returned. At around 4:30 p.m., Kathy arrived back at Sarah's apartment to pick her up. When she was outside, she called Sarah to let her know she was there, but Sarah didn't answer the phone. And so she waited to see if she would come out of the building, but after a few minutes went by, Sarah didn't come outside. Kathy then tried to call her daughter again, but she still wasn't answering the phone. And so she then decided that she would go and knock on Sarah's door. She had no reason to believe that anything was wrong at that point, but it was strange that her daughter had not come outside or answered the phone, knowing that she was coming to pick her up. When Kathy knocked on the door, there was no answer, but the door was unlocked, and so she entered the apartment and called out for her daughter, but she got no response. Kathy walked back to her daughter's bedroom, and there, lying on the floor, was Sarah. At first, Kathy thought maybe her daughter had fallen out of the bed and hit her head, but when she bent down to touch her, she was cold. And that's when she noticed a bullet wound in her daughter's head. It was the last thing any mother should ever have to see. It was a horrific scene. Sarah was dead. Kathy called 911 and then entered a state of shock. When police arrived at the apartment, Kathy was outside crying, saying Sarah's name over and over again. When police entered Sarah's apartment, the scene that awaited them was both chilling and perplexing. They found Sarah lying on her bedroom floor, having been shot twice in the head at close range. Nearby, there were two .380 caliber shell casings lying on the floor, along with a bloodstained pillow that bore the evidence of gunshots. The crime scene immediately raised troubling questions. Despite the violence of the act, there was no sign of forced entry, suggesting that Sarah might have known her killer or had willingly let them in. Adding to the mystery, Sarah's purse was found on her bed, undisturbed, with cash still inside. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, ruling out robbery as a motive. The apartment showed no signs of struggle or ransacking, and no obvious clues pointed to why someone would brutally murder Sarah in the safety of her own home. The senselessness of the crime left investigators baffled. With no clear motive, Sarah's murder was a haunting mystery. Immediately, the investigations shifted to the people close to Sarah, starting with her boyfriend Greg. According to her family, Greg was not a good guy. He had been in trouble with the law before and had a history of being violent. There were accusations that Greg was controlling and allegedly abusive towards Sarah, and there were rumors that he had been unfaithful, cheating on Sarah with several women. Once detectives assigned to Sarah's case learned about Greg, he became their first suspect. However, when detectives tried to speak to Greg, initially he refused to talk. But then Greg, on his own, came into the police station. He said that he wanted to clear his name. And when Greg sat down with police, he began to go over the details from that morning. Greg told police that he had spent the night at Sarah's apartment on June 25th. The next morning, he said Sarah had bought him breakfast before heading out to run errands with her mom. After she left, he fell back asleep and woke up around 10 a.m. to find the apartment empty. Greg mentioned that he had plans to go to Harvey, Illinois later that day and was waiting for his ride to pick him up. While he was waiting, an acquaintance named Rex Frank stopped by the apartment and Greg let him inside. According to Greg, Rex asked if he could buy some weed, but Greg told him that he didn't sell weed. And then Rex asked Greg if he had a gun, but Greg said that he didn't have one. Greg described Rex as more of an acquaintance than a friend, someone who had attached himself to Greg in his circle. After asking for weed and a gun, neither of which Greg had, Rex then asked to borrow some money. Greg told him that he didn't have any cash, explaining that he was planning to go to Harvey to pick up some iPhones that he intended to resell. Greg said that after that, Rex left the apartment, and about 5 minutes later, Sarah came back home. And shortly after Sarah returned, Greg's ride came and he left, locking the apartment door behind him. On his way to Harvey, Greg said that he got a call from Rex, asking him about the iPhones he was getting. Greg said that he told Rex that he would talk to him about it later and hung up. But after hanging up with Rex, Greg noticed that he had 2 missed calls from Sarah and a message asking for him to call her back, and so he did, and they spoke briefly on the phone, but it's not clear what this conversation was about. At around 4 p.m., as he was headed back from Harvey, Greg said that he got another call from Rex, and this time he was telling him that there was crime scene tape outside Sarah's apartment. Initially, police were very suspicious of Greg, but After speaking to him and confirming his alibi, they ruled him out as a suspect. And although they did not believe that he was involved in Sarah's murder, he had pointed them in a new direction, and now they were interested in learning more about his associate, Rex. After getting Rex's information, they contacted him, and he voluntarily came in to speak to police also. At around 7:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, Rex sat down with detectives and told a similar story to what they had learned from Greg, with a few details that didn't exactly line up. Because, according to Rex, he had gone to Sarah's apartment twice that morning. He said that he arrived at around 11:45 and he came into the apartment and spoke to Greg. But then he said he left to run an errand. And then he came back to the apartment, and that's when Greg told him about the quote unquote phone scam. He said that Sarah was not there when he came back. And then at 12:30 p.m., Rex said that he again came back to the apartment, and this time Sarah was home, and she told him that Greg had already left. He said that Sarah never opened the door. And then Rex said that he went home before going to the barber shop at around 4 p.m., and he denied having anything to do with Sarah's murder. With no motive and no evidence directly linking Rex to the murder, detectives had no choice but to let him go. Rex remained a person of interest, but without concrete proof, they couldn't hold him. This setback left investigators frustrated as they found themselves back at square one, struggling to piece together the events leading up to Sarah's murder. The lack of leads only deepened the mystery, casting a shadow over the investigation early on as they continued to search for answers. As part of the investigation, detectives also spoke to neighbors in Sarah's building. One witness said that she saw Sarah coming home at around 12 p.m., and then, at around 1:30 p.m., she heard rumbling upstairs and then heard a pop. The neighbor helped police with establishing their timeline, but they needed a suspect and a motive, and they had neither. The people closest to Sarah could not imagine who or why someone would want her dead or would have hated her enough to shoot her twice in her own home. She was well loved by her family and friends, known for her kindness and her warm spirit. Sarah had no known enemies, and her life appeared to be on an upward trajectory, making her murder all the more incomprehensible. The sheer brutality of the act left those who knew her in shock, grappling with the horrifying reality that someone had brutally taken her life. As the investigation dragged on, the lack of answers only deepened their pain, leaving a lingering question that haunted everyone who knew and loved her. Why Sarah? On June 26, 2014, 25-year-old Sarah Washington was found shot to death inside her home in Kankakee, Illinois. After ruling out her boyfriend as a suspect, investigators were struggling to find a motive and their killer. In the hours after Sarah's murder, detectives working the case had interviewed several witnesses, including her boyfriend Greg and an associate of his named Rex that had been at the apartment earlier on the day of the murder. But they had ruled Greg out, and they had no evidence that Rex had been involved, and so detectives found themselves back at square one. After speaking to Sarah's friends and family, they learned that there was another man in her life. Not long before her murder, she had become friendly with a man at work named Kevin. Unclear about the nature of their relationship, detectives decided that they needed to speak to him too. Perhaps there was something there, and they also needed to rule him out. 5 days after the murder, detectives brought Kevin in to be interviewed. He said that he and Sarah had a casual, friendly relationship, and that was it. He said that the last time he spoke to her was 4 days before her death. Kevin also had an alibi for the day of the murder. He had been working, which detectives confirmed, and so he was ruled out as a suspect. In the wake of Sarah's murder, both her family and detectives felt an overwhelming urgency to find the truth and find her killer. For her family, of course, the need for answers was deeply personal. They were desperate to understand how someone could take the life of a woman so full of promise and love. Each passing day without resolution was a painful reminder of the injustice that they were enduring. Detectives, too, felt the pressure mounting as the investigation dragged on. The lack of leads and a clear motive only intensified their determination to bring Sarah's murderer to justice. With the community watching and Sarah's loved ones demanding answers, the investigators knew they had to work tirelessly to bring justice to a grieving family and ensure that the person responsible was held accountable. In the days following the murder, detectives continued to interview witnesses, and a crucial detail from one of those witnesses shifted their focus back to Rex. Detectives spoke to a young woman named Deja who told them that on June 26th, the day of Sarah's murder, she saw Rex at a local Dairy Queen at around 2:30 p.m. She said that he was there for about 30 minutes before leaving. Now, this detail may seem benign, but the problem was Rex had told police that he had gone home after leaving Sarah's apartment that last time. And so, him being a Dairy Queen meant that he had lied about his whereabouts. The implications of Rex lying about his whereabouts were substantial for detectives. By providing false information about his location on the day of Sarah's murder, Rex introduced a critical inconsistency that could not be overlooked. This discrepancy suggested that he may be concealing something, potentially linking him to the murder, or revealing that he had something to hide about his actions that day. Now, given the timing of his lie in relation to the murder, detectives saw it as a major red flag. Rex's dishonesty raised the possibility that he did have a motive or was involved, and he was unwilling to reveal it, making it crucial for detectives to reassess his role in this case. As the investigation into Sarah's murder continued, with Rex's deceit adding a new layer of complexity to the case, the search for answers took an unexpected turn. 9 days after the murder, another tragedy struck. Now, this new crime not only heightened the sense of fear in the community, but also brought new questions to the forefront, complicating the detectives' efforts to solve Sarah's case and potentially connecting the two murders in ways they had yet to uncover. On July 5th, 2014, police were called to the home of a man named Ryan Maiden. When police entered his home, Ryan was found dead on his kitchen floor. He had been shot multiple times, and his ATM card was missing. Now, what happened next is somewhat confusing and a bit unclear, but according to reports, while police were processing the crime scene at Ryan's home, Rex Frank showed up at the crime scene. And this is confusing for several reasons. First, I could not find in my research what, if any, connection Rex had to Ryan. And when Rex showed up at the scene, he was confronted by detectives. They asked him if they could search his vehicle, and he agreed. And inside, they found an ATM receipt for a $500 withdrawal. When detectives asked Rex about the money, he denied that the money was taken from Ryan, and he said he had no knowledge of the crime. The entire situation was bizarre. Why would Rex return to the scene of a murder and then willingly allow detectives to search his car? His actions raised more questions than answers, leaving investigators puzzled. Was it an attempt to appear cooperative and innocent, or was there a deeper, more sinister reason behind his presence? The fact that Rex returned to the crime scene, coupled with the discovery of the ATM receipt, only added to the growing suspicion surrounding him. Detectives were left to wonder if Rex was hiding in plain sight, or if his behavior was simply a series of reckless decisions that coincidentally tied him to two violent crimes. On July 11th, 2014, Rex Frank was brought into the police station to be questioned further about Ryan's murder. After initially denying involvement in the crime, Rex began telling detectives what really happened. He said that he had gone to Ryan's house to rob him. He said he entered the home through the garage door, but when he went inside, Ryan confronted him while he was trying to steal his wallet, and then the two began to fight. Rex said that he pulled out a Taurus .380 caliber handgun and then demanded Ryan give him his PIN number, which he did. But instead of just leaving, he shot Ryan 3 times, killing him. He then took Ryan's ATM card and withdrew $500, money he used to buy gifts for his girlfriend. After his confession, Rex was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in Ryan's death. The murder of Ryan Maiden had been solved, but Sarah's case had not. However, with Rex in custody for another murder, detectives were now closer than ever to finding the truth. Rex had confessed to using a Taurus .380 caliber gun to kill Ryan, and that was the same caliber of gun used to kill Sarah, and ballistics experts believed it was possible the gun was a Taurus. And during his confession, Rex said that he had the gun for 3 months before throwing it in a dumpster after killing Ryan. In July 2014, Rex pled guilty but mentally ill in Ryan's murder. His defense claimed that Rex suffered PTSD after being the victim of a carjacking a few months prior. During that incident, Rex shot and killed the 18-year-old carjacker. For Ryan's murder, Rex received 45 years in prison. With him safely behind bars, detectives working Sarah's case continued searching for enough evidence to charge Rex for Sarah's murder, and they believed that the ballistics would seal his fate. Ballistics tests were run on the bullets found in Ryan and the bullets recovered from Sarah's murder. And when the results came back, it showed that both murders had been committed with the same gun. In April 2016, almost 2 years after Sarah's murder, Rex Frank was indicted for her murder. Prosecutors believe that robbery was possibly the motive in her death too, even though nothing of value was stolen from her apartment. On March 4th, 2019, Rex Frank went on trial for Sarah's murder. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecutors presented its case, laying out the evidence that had been gathered over the years. The ballistics match, Rex's inconsistent statements, and his connection to the weapon used in both Sarah's and Ryan's murder all pointed to his guilt. Sarah's family, who had waited nearly 5 years for justice, hoped that this trial would finally bring closure to the nightmare that they had endured. As the trial unfolded, the weight of the evidence against Rex seemed insurmountable, leaving little doubt that the truth behind Sarah's tragic death would soon be revealed. The defense attempted to paint a different picture, claiming there was no physical evidence linking Rex to the murder, and instead tried to point the finger at Greg, claiming that he had a history of being abusive towards Sarah. But in the end, the jury did not believe Rex or his attorney, and he was found guilty of first-degree murder. And in July 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison. He is currently serving his sentence in an Illinois state prison. 10 years after Sarah's brutal and senseless murder, the true motive behind her death remains shrouded in mystery. Despite the conviction of Rex Frank, the reasons why Sarah became a target that fateful day are still unclear. And her family continues to grapple with these unanswered questions, haunted by the lingering uncertainty. Now, while justice may have been served in a courtroom, the lack of a clear motive leaves an unresolved chapter in Sarah's story, a shadow over the closure that her family so desperately sought. Sarah was a young, beautiful woman, so full of life, and the fact that this man came to her home and murdered her for seemingly no reason is truly a hard thing to try to understand. As the years have passed, the memory of Sarah's vibrant life continues to burn brightly in the hearts of those who loved her. The laughter she shared, the dreams she chased, and the kindness she embodied are what her family and friends hold on to, even as the weight of her loss remains heavy. The conviction of her killer brought some measure of justice, but it can never bring back the future that was stolen from her. Sarah was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a beacon of light in her community, and her absence is felt in the spaces that she once filled with love and warmth. May Sarah Washington rest in peace. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Threads.